The day my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You are dead to me," I believed her. I had to, because she meant every single word. But 9 years later, she was the one standing on my porch, shaking, with tears running down her face, asking me to save her. And I had to decide, was I still the same girl who needed her mother's love, or had I finally become someone who no longer did? My name is Claire Hendricks. I'm 41 years old and I live in Columbus, Ohio. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how my own family tore me apart for loving a good man, and how, eventually, life brought every single one of them right back to my door. Before I get into it, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and state in the comments, or your country if you're watching from somewhere outside the US. And if you enjoy real, emotional stories like this one, please hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching. This one is going to stay with you. I grew up in a small town called Millhaven, Georgia. And when I say small, I mean everybody knows everybody small. The kind of place where what you do on a Saturday night gets talked about at church on Sunday morning. My family had lived there for 3 generations. The Hendricks name carried weight in that town, not because we were rich, but because we were known. My grandfather had built a small hardware store that my uncle eventually took over. My father had worked at the county courthouse for over 20 years. We weren't wealthy, but we had a reputation, and in Millhaven, Georgia, reputation was everything. My mother, Donna Hendricks, was the kind of woman who could make you feel loved and suffocated at the same time. She was warm when she wanted to be, the type of mom who made biscuits from scratch on Sunday mornings and always knew when you were crying even when you were trying not to. But she also had this iron grip on what she believed the world should look like. Her world, her version of it, and anything that didn't fit inside that picture made her deeply, deeply uncomfortable. I had an older brother, Ray, and a younger sister, Patrice. Ray was the golden child, steady job, married a local girl named Tina, bought a house 2 streets over from my parents. Patrice was the baby, always a little dramatic, always performing for whoever was in the room. And then there was me, the middle child, the quiet one, the one who left. I left Millhaven at 18 to go to college in Columbus. It felt like escaping a jar with a lid that had been screwed on too tight. I could finally breathe in Columbus. I could be myself without feeling like the whole town was watching. I studied business administration, worked 2 part-time jobs to stay afloat, and slowly, carefully built a life that felt like mine. That's where I met Marcus. Marcus Okafor was not what I expected and everything I didn't know I needed. He was a structural engineer, originally from Cincinnati, the son of a Nigerian father and a Black American mother. He was tall, steady, quietly funny, and had this way of listening to you that made you feel like the most important person in the room. We met at a work conference. I was in my 2nd year at a marketing firm. He was there representing his engineering company. We were both waiting in line for terrible conference coffee, and he leaned over and said, "I think they made this with regret and sadness, but it's all they've got." I laughed harder than I'd laughed in months. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, 2 of the best years of my life. I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that telling my family would not be simple. I had told my mother once during a phone call that I was seeing someone wonderful. She'd asked the usual questions: what does he do, where is he from, is he a good man? I answered all of them honestly. And then she asked, in that careful, controlled voice she used when she already suspected the answer, "And what does he look like, Claire?" I told her. The silence on the phone was so long I thought the call had dropped. "We'll talk about it when you come home," she said, and then she changed the subject. I let myself believe that maybe it would be okay, that maybe my family would see what I saw, a kind, intelligent, loving man who treated me like I mattered. I let myself hope. Looking back, I don't know if that hope was naive or necessary. Maybe both. Marcus and I drove to Millhaven together in late October, a few weeks after he proposed. I was wearing the ring, a simple, elegant oval diamond on a gold band. He had picked it himself. I had cried when he put it on my finger. The drive down felt easy and warm. Marcus held my hand across the center console and told me it was going to be fine. He believed it. I wanted to. We pulled up to my parents' house just after dinner. The porch light was on. My mother came to the door before we even made it up the steps, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder. It was the look of someone deciding, very quickly, how to arrange their feelings into something manageable. My father, Gene, came up behind her. He nodded at Marcus with a tight, careful smile. We went inside. My mother had set out sweet tea and cookies on the coffee table, which she always did when she was trying to hold something together. I introduced Marcus properly, full name, his work, his family, where he grew up. He was gracious and warm and said all the right things. He shook my father's hand firmly. He complimented my mother on her home. None of it mattered. Within 20 minutes the conversation shifted. My mother started asking leading questions that weren't really questions. Things like, well, do you think Columbus is really the right place to raise a family? And, have you thought about what people here would say? Marcus stayed calm. I could feel him staying calm on purpose, and I loved him for it even as my stomach was twisting. Then Ray showed up. Nobody had told me Ray was coming, which meant my mother had called him. He came in with Tina, who wouldn't make eye contact with me, and within 5 minutes he was making comments that weren't subtle at all. Things said with a smile, the way cowards always do it. Columbus must be real different from here, he said, looking at Marcus. You'll just get to do whatever up there, huh? Marcus set down his glass of sweet tea. He looked at Ray with complete composure and said, I think every place has its own culture. I try to be respectful of wherever I am. It was a perfect answer. Ray didn't deserve it. The evening deteriorated from there. By the time the sun had fully gone down, my mother was no longer pretending. She pulled me into the kitchen while Marcus sat in the living room with my father, who had gone almost completely silent. She stood across the counter from me with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, and she said, Claire, I need you to really think about what you're doing. I told her I had thought about it. I told her I was happy. I told her Marcus was a good man. She shook her head slowly, like I was a child who didn't understand a very simple thing. It's not about whether he's a good man, she said. It's about what people will say. It's about what your children will go through. It's about this family. What about this family? I asked her. My voice was quieter than I expected it to be. We have a name in this town, she said. Your grandfather built something here, your father. Is going to be fine, I interrupted. None of this is going to hurt anyone, Mama, unless you decide to make it hurt. She looked at me then with something I can only describe as grief, like she was already mourning me. If you marry this man, she said slowly, you are choosing him over your family. I'm not choosing anything over anything, I said. I'm asking you to accept who I love. She didn't answer that. She just turned around and started rinsing dishes that were already clean. We left that night. Marcus drove. I didn't cry until we were back on the highway. He reached over and held my hand the whole way home. Things moved quickly after that, the way pain usually does when a decision has already been made somewhere beneath the surface. My mother called me 3 times over the next 2 weeks. Each call was a version of the same conversation, pressure wrapped in concern, manipulation dressed as love. The 3rd call was the last one. She told me that if I went through with the marriage, she would not be there. She said my father felt the same. She said Ray and Beatrice had agreed that this was not something the family could support. I asked her one last time. I said, Mama, are you telling me you will cut me off completely, over this? You're making a choice, she said. We're making ours. I hung up the phone and sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. Marcus and I got married on a Saturday in June. It was a small, beautiful wedding at a venue just outside Columbus. His family came, his parents, his 2 sisters, cousins, aunts and uncles. They were warm and celebratory and welcomed me with open arms and joyful tears. My side of the church held 2 people. My college roommate Denise, who had been like a sister to me, and my former co-worker Sandra, who had always been quietly kind. That was it. My mother didn't come, my father didn't come, Ray didn't come, Beatrice, who I had always been closest to in spite of everything, didn't come. I stood at the altar in my dress and looked out at the pews, and I made myself look at the joy on Marcus's face and hold on to that instead of the empty seats. I made a promise to myself that day too, not just the vows I said out loud, but a quieter promise I made to myself alone. I promised that I would not spend my life chasing people who had chosen to leave. I would grieve it. I would mourn it. And then I would build something so full and so good that the loss would not be able to hollow me out. And that's exactly what I did. The first year of our marriage was the hardest, not because of Marcus, never because of Marcus, but because grief doesn't care how happy you are. It lives right alongside the joy, quiet and patient, reminding you of what's missing. I would be laughing at dinner, and then suddenly think about how my mother would never sit at this table. I would cook a recipe I had learned from her and feel the ache of it all the way down to my hands. I missed her the way you miss someone who is still alive, which is somehow worse than the regular kind of missing. Because there's no clean ending to it. The door is still technically there. It's just been bolted shut from the other side. Marcus knew, he always knew without me having to say it. On the hard nights he would sit next to me on the couch and just be there solid and quiet until I was ready to come back to myself. He never pushed me to forgive them, but he also never let me sink too deep. "You are not what they decided you were," he told me once. "And this life we're building, it's real, Claire, this is real." He was right, it was real. We bought a house in a good neighborhood on the north side of Columbus, a 4-bedroom colonial with a big backyard and a porch that I immediately fell in love with. I had been promoted twice at my marketing firm and was now leading a full team. Marcus's engineering firm was growing steadily, and he had just been brought on as a senior project manager for a major city infrastructure contract. We were doing well. Not flashy, not excessive, just solid, careful, real well. 2 years into our marriage, our son was born. We named him Elias Marcus Okafor. He came into the world on a Tuesday morning in February, screaming at full volume, and I have never loved anything the way I loved him in that first moment. Marcus cried. I had never seen him cry before, and watching this strong, steady man completely undone by the sight of our son made me feel something I don't have the right words for even now. 3 years after Elias, our daughter arrived. We named her Nadia. She was quiet from the start, wide-eyed and observant, the kind of baby who seemed to be studying everything around her. She looked like Marcus around the eyes and like me around the mouth, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My life was full, genuinely, deeply full. But I won't pretend the silence from my family didn't still hurt. It just hurt differently as the years went on. In the beginning, it was sharp and constant. By year 4 or 5, it had become something more like a scar, present, permanent, but no longer bleeding. I had learned to live around it. I did hear things occasionally through the distant grapevine. Denise had a cousin in Millhaven who would sometimes pass along information without me asking for it. I learned that my father had had a mild heart episode about 3 years after the wedding. He was okay, recovered fully, but nobody had called me. I learned that Ray and Tina had 2 kids now and were still living 2 streets from my parents. I learned that Patris had moved to Atlanta for a while and then come back, which surprised nobody who knew Patris. I sent my parents a Christmas card every year for the first 4 years. I included photos, our house, our family growing, Elias as a baby, then as a toddler. I never received a response. After the 4th year, I stopped sending them, not out of bitterness, out of self-preservation. There is only so many times you can reach towards someone before the reaching itself starts to damage you. Marcus never said I told you so, not once. That's the kind of man he was. By the time Elias was 6 and Nadia was 3, I had genuinely settled into a life that felt complete without them. I had Marcus's family, who had embraced me so fully that his mother, Gloria, had become one of my closest people. She called me every Sunday. She sent the kids gifts on their half-birthdays just because she felt like it. She was the grandmother my children deserved, and I was grateful for her every single day. I had good friends, a career I was proud of, a home I loved. I had Marcus, who still made me laugh harder than anyone alive and still reached for my hand in the car the way he had on that drive back from Millhaven all those years ago. 9 years had passed since my wedding day. And then on a Wednesday afternoon in March, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus was at work. Elias was at school. Nadia was upstairs napping. I was at the kitchen table going over some campaign reports, still in my work-from-home clothes, coffee going cold beside me. I went to the door half distracted and looked through the peephole. I stepped back from the door. I looked again, thinking I had somehow imagined it. I had not imagined it. My mother was standing on my porch. She looked older, of course she did, 9 years is 9 years, but it was more than that. She looked worn in a way I didn't recognize. Donna Hendricks had always carried herself like a woman who had everything managed. Chin up, shoulders back, expression controlled. The woman on my porch had none of that. Her hair was still neat, but the rest of her looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. She was holding her purse in front of her with both hands, the way people hold things when they need something to hold onto. I stood at that door for what felt like a full minute. Every part of me was having a different reaction. Part of me wanted to open it immediately, that old, deep, little girl part of me that had never stopped wanting her mother. Part of me wanted to walk away from the door entirely, go back to my kitchen table, and pretend I hadn't seen her. And part of me, the part that had been through the wedding, and the empty pews and the Christmas cards with no reply, that part was absolutely still, waiting to see what I would decide to do with this moment. I opened the door. We looked at each other, Her eyes went red almost immediately. Mine stayed dry, which surprised me. "Claire," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered it. "Mama," I said. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something else, and then just pressed her lips together and shook her head slightly, like the words had gotten stuck somewhere. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. She nodded. I stepped back and let her into my house. She walked in slowly, looking around the entryway, the living room, the framed photos on the wall, Elia's school picture, Nadia grinning at the beach, Marcus and me at his firm's anniversary dinner last year. She stopped in front of that last one for a moment and then looked away. I offered her coffee. She accepted. I made it the way she used to make it at home, 2 sugars, a little cream. The fact that I still remembered that after everything made something tighten quietly in my chest. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table. The same table I had imagined her never sitting at. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked down at it for a moment. "I should have called first," she said. "Yes," I agreed, "you should have." She looked up at me then, and for a second she looked exactly like the mother I remembered from before all of it, before Millhaven, before the phone calls, before the empty church pews. She looked like the woman who made biscuits on Sunday mornings and always knew when I was crying. And then she looked down again. "I'm in trouble, Claire," she said quietly. "I need your help." I kept my face still. I had learned stillness over the last 9 years. I had earned it. "What kind of trouble?" I asked. She exhaled slowly, and then she told me. My father had retired from the courthouse 2 years ago. A few months after that, he had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. It had progressed faster than the doctors initially expected. He was now struggling significantly with daily tasks, and his care needs had grown beyond what my mother could manage alone. They had burned through most of their savings on medical bills and home modifications, and the part-time aid they'd had to let go when the money ran out. Ray, she told me, Ray and Tina had made it clear they couldn't help financially. Ray had apparently had a bad couple of years with his business and claimed he had nothing to spare. Beatrice was back in Atlanta, working some kind of inconsistent job, and had all but disappeared. And so my mother, Donna Hendricks, who had told me I was choosing a man over my family, who had stayed home on my wedding day, who had never once responded to a Christmas card, had driven 4 hours from Millhaven, Georgia, to Columbus, Ohio, to knock on the door of the daughter she had rejected. I sat with all of that for a long moment. "How bad is he?" I asked. My voice was steady. She looked at me with those tired, worn eyes and said, "He asked about you last week. He said your name in his sleep." Her voice broke just slightly on the last word. "I think he's scared he's going to run out of time." I looked down at my coffee. Outside the window, the March sky was grey and flat. I could hear the soft sounds of Nadia stirring upstairs from her nap. I had 9 years of silence sitting between me and this woman. 9 years of building a life without her. 9 years of learning to be okay. And now here she was, needing me. I lifted my eyes back to hers and said, "I need to think about this." She nodded quickly, like she had expected nothing better and was grateful even for that. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known sitting at my kitchen table that afternoon, was that thinking about it was going to take me somewhere she wasn't prepared for. Because I had spent 9 years becoming someone who did not make decisions out of guilt or fear or the desperate need to be loved by people who had already shown me who they were. And this time, if I was going to help, there were going to be conditions. After my mother left that afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Nadia had come downstairs from her nap, climbed into my lap without asking, and fallen back asleep against my chest the way she sometimes did. I held her and stared at the wall and let everything settle inside me like sediment after water has been disturbed. By the time Marcus came home, I had made coffee twice and drunk neither cup. He came through the door the way he always did, keys on the hook, jacket on the chair, a quiet, "Hey you" in my direction before he even took his shoes off. Then he saw my face and stopped. "What happened?" he said. I told him everything, from the doorbell to the peephole to the kitchen table conversation. I told him about my father's Parkinson's, about the money being gone, about Ray claiming he had nothing to spare, about Beatrice vanishing to Atlanta. I told him what my mother had looked like standing on our porch, holding her purse with both hands like it was the only solid thing she had left. Marcus listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know yet, I said honestly. He nodded, then don't decide yet. That was Marcus. He never pushed. He understood that some things needed to be sat with before they could be sorted through. He made dinner that night while I bathed the kids, and we didn't talk about it again until after Elias and Nadia were in bed. Then we sat on the back porch with the outdoor light on and the early March cold sitting around us, and we talked it through properly. I told him I felt pulled in two directions that had nothing to do with each other. There was the daughter in me, the one who had grown up in that house, who had watched her father coach her little league team and fix her bicycle in the driveway and sit at the head of every Thanksgiving table. That part of me ached at the thought of him sick and scared and fadding. And then there was the woman I had become, the one who had stood at an altar with two guests on her side of the church and made a silent promise to herself that she would not chase people who had chosen to leave. Those two things can both be true, Marcus said. You can love your father and still require something from your family before you walk back in. I looked at him. You wouldn't resent me if I helped them. He looked almost surprised by the question. Claire, your pain is my pain, your peace is my peace. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But I need you to decide for yourself, not for them, not out of guilt, for yourself. I already knew, sitting there on that porch, that I was going to help my father. My father had not been the loudest voice in that kitchen in Millhaven, my mother had been. My father had gone quiet, the way he sometimes did when my mother had already decided something. He had not stood up for me, and that wound was real. But he had asked about me in his sleep. He had said my name. And whatever complicated history lived between us, he was my father. I was not built to turn away from that. But helping my father and handing my mother an unconditional rescue were two very different things. I called my mother the next morning. She picked up on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. I've thought about it, I said. And her voice was careful, restrained, trying not to want too much. I want to come see Daddy, I said. I want to see him myself, understand what he needs and talk to his doctors. After that we'll figure out next steps, but I need something from you first. A pause. What do you need? I need you to call Ray and Patris and tell them I'm coming. Not to warn them, not to get their approval, to inform them. And I need you to understand that when I come, I'm coming as Marcus's wife. His name is Marcus Okafor, he is my husband, he is the father of your grandchildren, and if anyone in that house, anyone, treats him or the memory of him with disrespect while I'm trying to help this family, I will leave and I will not come back. Not for any reason. The silence this time was different from the one 9 years ago. This one wasn't cold, it was something closer to reckoning. Okay, she said quietly, I understand. I mean it, Mammoth. I know you do, she said, I know. We drove to Millhaven 2 weekends later. Marcus came with me. I had not asked him to, but he had simply said he was coming and I had not argued. We brought Elias and Nadia. If my family was going to know me again, they were going to know all of me. The drive down felt nothing like that first drive 9 years ago. There was no cautious hope this time. There was something quieter and more solid, a sense of moving forward with my eyes open rather than half closed with wishful thinking. Elias spent most of the drive with his headphones on, which was standard for an 8-year-old. Nadia asked questions about everything outside the window. Marcus drove. I watched the landscape change from city to suburbs to the long, flat stretches of rural Georgia. Millhaven looked exactly the same. That was the first thing I noticed. Some places grow and change with the years. Columbus had transformed dramatically in the time I'd been there. But Millhaven looked like it had been sealed in amber. Same storefronts, same church steeples, same roads I had ridden my bicycle on as a kid. It felt smaller than I remembered, which I supposed made sense. My parents' house looked the same too, at least from the outside. But when we pulled into the driveway, and I saw the wheelchair ramp that had been installed over the front steps, the raw new lumber of it against the old painted porch, something in me shifted. That ramp made it real in a way that my mother's words hadn't quite managed. She came to the door before we were out of the car. She was dressed carefully, like she had thought about what to wear. She looked at Marcus when he stepped out of the car, and for a moment she just stood there. Then she looked at the kids. Nadia was already curious, looking up at the house with her wide eyes. Elias hung back slightly, reading the room the way he always did. My mother came down off the porch and walked toward us, and she looked at Nadia, and her face did something completely unguarded. She pressed one hand to her mouth for just a second. "These are my grandchildren," she said. It wasn't a question, it was something she was saying to herself. Yes, I said, this is Nadia and this is Elias. Nadia, who had never met a stranger in her life, walked right up to my mother and said, "Your house has a ramp. Our school has a ramp too." My mother let out a small, broken sound that was almost a laugh. She crouched down to Nadia's level. "It does have a ramp," she said softly. "That's very smart of you to notice." I looked away for a moment. I needed a second. My father was in the living room in a recliner that had been moved to face the door, positioned, I realized, so he could see people coming in. He was thinner than I remembered, and the Parkinson's had introduced a slight tremor to his hands that he was clearly trying to manage by keeping them folded in his lap. But his eyes were the same, sharp and dark and deeply familiar. When he saw me, his expression moved through about 4 different things in 2 seconds, and then settled into something that looked like relief so profound it had nowhere left to go. "Claire Bayer," he said. He hadn't called me that since I was maybe 9 years old. I crossed the room and hugged him carefully, the way you hug someone when you're aware of their fragility. He held on longer than I expected. His arms were thinner, but the grip was still there. "I'm here, Daddy," I said. "I know," he said into my shoulder. "I know you are." Ray showed up an hour later. He came through the back door like he lived there, which in spirit he practically did, and stopped short when he saw us. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the kids. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that I couldn't entirely name. It wasn't quite shame, wasn't quite resentment. It was the complicated expression of a man who had said and done things he couldn't unsay or undo, and was now standing in the room with the consequences. "Hey," he said. "Hey, Ray," I said. He shook Marcus's hand. It wasn't warm, but it happened. Marcus gave him a nod. He was more gracious than Ray deserved. Tina came with him, and she was the one who surprised me. She walked over to me while Ray was awkwardly trying to make conversation with Elias, and she said, quietly, close enough that only I could hear, "I'm glad you came, Claire, I mean that." She looked uncomfortable, like the words had cost her something. "I should have called you years ago. I thought about it, I'm sorry I didn't." I looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Tina," I said. I meant it too. Patris did not come. My mother said she had told her, had called her 3 times. Patris had said she would try to make it and then gone silent. Classic Patris. I filed that away without surprise. That weekend, I sat with my father's doctor, a kind, direct woman named Dr. Anand, and got a full picture of where things stood. The Parkinson's was progressing at a moderate rate. My father needed consistent medication management, regular physical therapy to maintain mobility as long as possible, occupational therapy support, and eventually, when the time came, more intensive care. He was not at crisis point yet, but without the proper structure and financial support, he would deteriorate much faster. Dr. Anand looked at me across the desk and said carefully, "Your mother has been managing this largely alone. That's not sustainable long term." I thanked her and went home to Marcus in the small bedroom that used to be Ray's. My old room was being used for storage, which I noticed and quietly noted, and I laid out everything I had learned. Marcus listened, asked questions, ran the numbers with me. He was methodical and calm, and I was endlessly grateful that I had married someone who led with his brain and his heart in equal measure. By Sunday evening, I had a plan. But the plan had terms, clear, firm, non-negotiable terms, because I had learned at great personal cost that going back to people who had hurt you without any conditions was not forgiveness. It was an invitation to be hurt again. I gathered my mother, my father, and Ray in the living room after the kids were in bed. Marcus sat beside me. I had a notepad. I had thought through every word. I looked at all 3 of them and I said, "I'm going to help, but here is how this is going to work." Ray shifted in his seat. My mother was very still. My father watched me with those sharp, familiar eyes. "I will set up and fund a proper care plan for Daddy," I began. "I will cover the cost of a qualified home health aide 4 days a week. I will cover his medication costs and physical therapy. Marcus and I will come down once a month to check in. I will handle the finances because I'm the one with the resources and the organizational capacity to do it responsibly." Ray opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," I said, and something in my voice stopped him cold. "In return, I need 3 things. First, Ray, you contribute what you can, even if it's small. This is not me carrying everything while you do nothing. Even $200 a month shows that you're in this. Second, this family never again asks me to minimize my husband or my marriage. Not a comment, not a look, not a silence that says what words won't. Marcus is my family, and my children are your blood whether you've chosen to acknowledge that or not. And third. I paused here because this was the one that mattered most. I need my mother to say out loud to my face what she did. Not to Marcus, not to the kids, to me. Because I have carried the weight of being told I was dead to her for 9 years, and I will not walk back into this family pretending that never happened. The room was very quiet. My father looked at my mother. She was looking at the floor. For a long moment, nobody said anything. And then my mother looked up at me with eyes that had gone completely glassy, and she opened her mouth to speak, and that was the moment Ray, of all people, decided to push back. Ray leaned forward in his chair with that familiar look on his face, the one he'd worn his whole life when he felt like someone was getting something he wasn't, or when a situation wasn't going the way he'd decided it should go. He had the nerve to look almost indignant. "Claire, come on now," he said in that slow, patronizing tone I remembered from childhood. "Mama's already dealing with enough. You're really going to make her sit here and confess, like some kind of trial?" I looked at him with complete steadiness. "Ray, I love you, but you don't get a vote on this." "She's your mother." "She is," I said, "and I'm her daughter, the one she told was dead to her, so yes, this matters to me, and if it makes you uncomfortable, you are welcome to leave the room." His jaw tightened. Tina, sitting beside him, put her hand on his arm and gave him a look I couldn't fully read, but that seemed to say, "Let it go." He settled back. He didn't like it, but he settled. My mother had not moved through any of that. She was still looking at me, and whatever internal war had been happening behind her eyes was quieting into something final. She looked older in that moment than I had ever seen her. Not frail, my mother was not a frail woman, but worn down to something more honest than she'd ever let herself be in front of me. She set her hands in her lap and she said, "I was wrong." The room stayed quiet. "What I said to you that you were dead to me, I had no right to say that to my child, no right at all." Her voice was low and controlled, but there was a tremor in it she couldn't fully manage. "I told myself I was protecting the family, protecting our name, our standing in this town, and the truth is I was afraid. I was small-minded and I was afraid, and I took that out on you." She paused. Her chin lifted slightly, not in defiance, but in the way people lift their chin when they're trying not to fall apart. "You deserved a mother who showed up for you. I didn't show up. I wasn't there on your wedding day. I never met your children. I missed 9 years of your life because I was too proud and too foolish to let go of what I thought things were supposed to look like." She looked at Marcus then, directly at him, and she said, "Marcus, I treated you as less than you are. You are Claire's husband. You are the father of my grandchildren, and I am ashamed of how I behaved toward you and toward her." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then he gave a single, quiet nod. "I appreciate that," he said, not warm, not cold, measured, honest. My mother looked back at me. Her eyes were wet now, but she wasn't letting the tears fall that was so deeply her, holding herself together by sheer will even in the middle of breaking. "I know an apology doesn't give you back what I took from you," she said. "I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm just asking you to let me try to do better." I held everything steady inside myself. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times over the years, sometimes with rage, sometimes with tears, sometimes with cold satisfaction. But sitting there in that living room, in the house I'd grown up in, with my husband beside me and my children asleep in the next room, I didn't feel any of those things. I felt something much quieter, something that had been waiting a long time to finally be set down. "Thank you," I said, "that's all I needed." And Ray looked at the floor. He didn't apologize that night. Ray was not built for it the way my mother was. But something had shifted in the room and even he could feel it. Before he and Tina left, he stopped at the door and said, without quite making eye contact, "$250 a month, I can do $250. It wasn't 200, it was more. I chose to accept it for what it was, not generosity exactly, but effort. Sometimes effort is what people have to offer. "I'll take effort." We drove back to Columbus the next morning. Nadia cried when we left because she wanted to stay and play with the cat my parents apparently had acquired since I'd last been there, a fat orange tabby named Biscuit that she had spent the entire weekend devoted to. Elias, in his quiet, observant way, had spent the last hour of the visit sitting with my father, asking him questions about the courthouse and the old hardware store and what Millhaven had been like when he was a boy. My father had lit up in a way I hadn't seen all weekend. When I hugged Elias at the car, he shrugged like it was nothing, but I saw the small smile he couldn't quite hide. Marcus and I didn't talk much on the drive home. Not because anything was wrong, it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from having done something hard together and come out the other side still standing. Somewhere around the Tennessee border he reached over and took my hand, the way he always did. I held on. The following weeks moved quickly. I hired a home health aide through a licensed agency, a warm, no-nonsense woman named Bernice who my father took to immediately, and who my mother approved of after approximately 1 week of suspicious observation. I set up automatic payments for my father's medications and coordinated with Dr. Arnant's office to ensure his physical therapy schedule was consistent. I built a shared digital folder where his medical documents, insurance information, and care notes all lived, organized, accessible, updated. Marcus helped me set up a simple monthly budget tracker so that Ray's contributions were logged and the overall costs were transparent. No ambiguity, no room for resentment to grow in the gaps, everything clear and documented. Marcus had a gift for that, for creating systems that removed the emotional static from practical problems. The first month I called my mother every Sunday. The calls were short and slightly careful, we were both still learning how to talk to each other again, still finding the tone. But they happened, consistently, that mattered. The second month she called me first. It was a Thursday evening in May. I was in the kitchen making dinner, Nadia sitting on the counter eating apple slices and telling me an elaborate story about something that had happened at preschool when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. She called to tell me that my father had had a good week, that he had walked to the end of the driveway and back with Bernice without the walker, that he had eaten a full dinner 3 nights in a row. She called to tell me something that was going well, without needing anything in return. I stood in my kitchen listening to her talk, and I felt something in my chest quietly, carefully open. Not all the way, I want to be honest about that. The 9 years didn't disappear. The empty pews didn't disappear. The Christmas cards with no reply didn't disappear. But something that had been locked for a very long time turned just slightly. "That's really good, Mama," I said. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "I did," I said, "thank you for calling." After we hung up, Nadia looked at me with those wide, perceptive eyes of hers and said, "Who was that?" "That was your grandmother," I said. She considered this, the one with the cat. "The one with the cat," I confirmed. "Okay," she said, and went back to her apple slices. I laughed, full and real and surprised by it, the way the best laughs always are. Beatrice finally surfaced about 6 weeks after our visit. She called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice carrying that particular blend of breezy and defensive that she had perfected over a lifetime. She said she was sorry she hadn't made it down. She said things had been complicated. She said Atlanta was a lot. I let her talk, and when she was done I said, "Beatrice, you don't have to perform for me, just be honest. Are you okay?" A pause, a long one. "Not really," she said quietly. And then, slowly, she told me some of what had been happening in her life, things she hadn't told anyone, I suspected. Nothing dramatic, just the accumulated weight of a person who had been making choices that weren't quite working and hadn't had anyone to be honest with about it. I listened, I didn't fix it, I didn't lecture. I just listened the way Marcus had taught me by example. At the end of the call she said, "I didn't think you'd want to hear from me." "You're my sister," I said, "that doesn't go away." She exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for years. We started talking regularly after that. It took time. Beatrice and I were learning each other as adults in a way we'd never quite managed before, but it was real. More real than anything we'd had when we were younger, honestly. Distance and silence, and the humbling effect of hard years had stripped away a lot of the performance. What was left was 2 women who were actually trying. The moment that stayed with me the most, the one I still think about, came about 4 months after that first visit. Marcus and I drove down to Millhaven for one of our monthly check-ins, just the 2 of us this time, while Elias and Nadia stayed with Gloria. We had dinner at my parents' house. Bernice had helped my mother prepare it before leaving for the evening, and we sat around that table, all 4 of us, and ate together. My father was having a good day. His hands were steadier than they'd been at our last visit. He was telling a story about something that had happened at the courthouse 20 years ago, some minor scandal involving a county commissioner and a missing filing cabinet, and he was telling it the way he used to tell stories, with that slow, building humor that got funnier the longer he drew it out. My mother was shaking her head and smiling. Marcus was laughing. I was laughing. And for just a moment I let myself take it in. The four of us at that table, the food and the warm light and the sound of my father's voice doing the thing it used to do. Marcus beside me, easy and present. My mother across from me, looking more rested than she had in months. It wasn't a perfect family, it would never be a perfect family. Too much had happened and I was clear-eyed enough not to romanticize it, but it was real and it was moving forward and that was something. After dinner, while Marcus helped my father move to the living room, my mother and I stood side by side at the kitchen sink washing dishes. We had done this 10,000 times when I was a child. It felt like muscle memory, the way she handed me the wet dishes to dry, the way we fell into a quiet rhythm without discussing it. After a while she said without looking at me, "He's a good man, Claire." I kept drying the glass in my hand. "I know," I said. "I mean Marcus," she said. I wanted to say it plainly." I set the glass down. I looked at her. She was still looking at the sink, hands in the water, and her jaw was doing that thing it did when she was holding herself together. "Thank you, Mama," I said. She nodded once sharply, and we kept washing dishes. That was the moment. Not the big speech in the living room, not the apology, not the tears. It was that two women standing at a sink and my mother saying out loud what she should have said 9 years ago. Plain and late and real. I drove home to Columbus that night with Marcus beside me and the Georgia dark rolling past the windows, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel when any of this began. Not triumph, not vindication. Peace, just quiet, solid, unhurried peace. I had not chased my family back. I had not begged for their love or shrunk myself to fit their expectations or pretended the years of silence hadn't happened. I had stood in my own doorway and decided, on my own terms, with my own conditions, for my own reasons, to extend a hand. And life had slowly, imperfectly, genuinely responded. My father is still with us. His Parkinson's is managed, not cured, not stopped, but managed, and he has more good days than bad ones right now. Bernice is practically family at this point. Ray sends his contribution every month, and he and I have reached a place that isn't close but is functional and honest, which is probably the best Ray is capable of, and I've made peace with that. Patrice is still a work in progress, but she's trying, which is more than I ever expected. And Marcus is exactly who he has always been. The man who waited in line for terrible conference coffee and made me laugh. The man who drove home in silence and held my hand. The man who sat beside me on a back porch in March cold and said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I chose him once, I would choose him again every single time. And to anyone watching this who has been told by the people who were supposed to love you that you made the wrong choice, I want you to hear this. You do not have to earn your place in your own life. You do not have to apologize for who you love. You do not have to wait by the door for people who chose to leave. Build your life. Build it full and good and completely. And if they come back ready to be honest and humble and real, you get to decide what happens next on your terms in your own time. That's not revenge, that's just becoming who you were supposed to be all along. If this story moved you, if you've ever been rejected by the people who were supposed to love you most, or if you've had to make the impossible choice between your heart and your family, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Your story matters, and it just might become our next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. If you have your own story or know someone with a story like this, share it in the comments. Your story could become our next video.